one of the most innovative schools. He's here to talk about constant innovation and the experience of innovating at IE Business School. So Martin, let's take it away.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much for this nice introduction. It is actually fantastic to have the chance to listen a little bit to what Nolan was saying, because obviously he was saying that education essentially is not functioning, it's not really working, especially when we look into the high school system in the US. And we probably could argue education in general looks a little bit more like this, right? When we actually talk about innovation, we typically don't think of the educational environment, the education sector, or academia at large as being something that constantly changes, that constantly innovates. What we typically expect them, or what we typically perceive academia to be, is staying still, being constant, and being caught up by what is actually changing around them. Actually, I think this is true for many institutions out there in the world, but I'm very glad to say that I have the opportunity to work at IE Business School, and I really believe that our DNA is very different. What we really try to do is embrace this change and see change as a fantastic opportunity, and obviously always try to push the boundaries and sometimes actually as well break the rules of the game in order to advance, in order to make learning more efficient for our students. Because I believe otherwise, we might be caught up like this guy, right? I mean, he clearly doesn't see it coming. He clearly doesn't see it coming, even it might come from the back or it might come from the front. And I really believe to a large extent that this could easily happen as well in the educational sector. Many of you probably have heard of new entrants coming into that market. That starts obviously with the MOOCs, right? Some of the MOOCs being out there and essentially delivering Ivy League education for free to millions and millions of learners out there. Lucky enough, it didn't disrupt completely our business model, right? I mean, people are still coming to business school, still going to university because they're still looking for getting a fundamental, a well-rounded education. Nevertheless, there are obviously other players who try to, for instance, modularize education, try to launch certificates instead of degrees in order to as well compete with established players in the executive market. So what I would like to do is share with you a little bit more what we actually do, how we try to constantly innovate, how to embrace this change in order to clearly stay afloat and hopefully actually not only stay afloat, but obviously lead as well the trends and lead the industry. What I try to do is really group, let's say, this change or our initiatives around three different aspects. What we try to do is we really try to constantly change what we actually teach or what our students learn. We try to constantly change as well and adapt how our students learn, and finally as well, where our students actually learn, where they're actually present in order to consume, let's say, knowledge and consume education. So let me start actually, first of all, with the what. What I really believe, and I think our institution believes that as well, is that future is a little bit foggy, right? I mean, we see it like here on this picture, right? I mean, like it's foggy. It's really difficult to make out where the future is going to take us. It might be that the street is going straight ahead, but it might be as well that it's turning left or it's turning right. And the same is obviously true as well when we look at education, when we think of the future jobs or the future requirements of our graduates. It is really difficult to see what kind of knowledge, what kind of expertise they might need in order to excel in the labor market. Nevertheless, what I truly believe is that even though the expectations with respect to knowledge, with respect to expertise, might actually change over time, one of the things that is typically not changing, and that is actually the demand for skills. And let me see whether that actually advances. Yes. So obviously the demand for skills is not changing. What I always will need at some point in time when I graduate tomorrow, when I graduate in a year time, 5 or 10 or 15 years time, is always going to be the ability to obviously communicate my ideas, to convince, to persuade others to actually follow me, to implement certain projects. I'm always going to require an ability to, for instance, manage projects, or I'm always going to require an ability to work in teams. This is something that is set. and no matter how the future is going to evolve, are always going to be needing that until we're going to be totally being taken over by robots. Then maybe that even that expertise or that skill is not going to help me. Nevertheless, what we try to do is really shift incrementally every year more and more, focusing our education really on skills development, and as we actually call it, habits of mind. So really developing, to a large extent, the personality, the values, and obviously as well, the abilities of our students, rather than focusing on knowledge. Knowledge is something that can be outdated fairly quickly, and we try to provide it only in a very consumable way in knowledge pills so that the students can actually take this in. So what we see is, with respect to what we learn, we clearly move from, let's say, knowledge more and more towards skills, or as we call it, habits of mind. What we try to do as well is, I come from a business school. And as you can imagine, the typical thing would be to teach business, right? I mean, that's what we would expect. I'm going for business school, get an MBA, so I'm expecting that I learn about marketing, finance, accounting, human resources management, and these kind of things. But as I have already mentioned, that the future is so volatile, the future is so ambiguous, what we really have to do is we have to set up as well our students with a more broader set of knowledge, a broader mindset as well. So what we believe in as well is to instill, or at least truffle all our programs with a wider approach, with topics and subjects that are not necessarily related directly with business. So for instance here, this is actually for those of you not coming from Spain, this is actually a picture of the aqueduct in Segovia, actually one of the best remaining artifacts of the Roman time. And if you have the chance and you're going to be here for the weekend, I encourage you to go to Segovia. I use this because we actually try to teach as well to all our master students about humanities, about critical management thinking, and we actually use examples about Roman times where we use examples or challenges from history and try to have the students work on these challenges, and sometimes with unorthodox methods try to resolve these problems that they're facing. So unorthodox methods in that sense that we're not only focusing on business knowledge in order to resolve these issues of the world. So we clearly try to stay afloat. We always try to innovate when it comes down to actually content, or what we actually teach our students, or what our students actually learn. But I really believe as well that the how has to change. And if you don't recognize, this is actually one of the earlier pictures of the Beatles. And I think it's a fantastic metaphor in order to describe what education should actually be all about. And especially when you think about business education, and more importantly, if you think about educating students, for instance, to become entrepreneurs, to become the new business leaders of the future. Because when I think about entrepreneurship, it is much more, or you have to have abilities and skills much more similar to a musician, much more similar to an artist, rather than the typical business consulting. The typical business consultant is obviously going to focus very much on analytical skills, is trying to think it through, try to analyze the situation, and try to identify all the different alternatives in order to come up with the best possible solution. But what we see as well is very often that they actually overthink things, and they actually don't get it done. They don't get actually the rubber on the ground. They're not going to be able to finally make it. What we see, however, in artists is that these guys have the passion. These guys have the drive. They want to make this happen. And many of you might actually know that the Beatles were not a success from the very first day, but actually they had multiple intents. And this is actually a picture that was taken in Hamburg because they were actually afraid to have their first performances on stage in the UK market, which they believed is their home market, their most important market. So they actually went to Germany in order to see how the audience, how the crowd is going to respond. Actually, at the beginning, they got booed off the stage. But they didn't give up because they had passion. They knew that they're onto something, and they knew that if they work on this and they try over and over again, they're going to get better. And you know, obviously, what happened with these guys. They became hugely successful. So what we see is, again, skill and the habits of mind, and especially in this particular case, persistence or passion is absolutely essential when we think about business, when we think about entrepreneurship. But obviously what we see as well, what artists are typically good at is synthesis, bringing different streams of music together, creating something new. And that can sometimes be the absolute breakthrough. And these skills are as well something that we clearly have to develop. And finally, the last part of the metaphor, which I think is quite instructive, is that it's obviously about practice. I have to train, I have to practice, I have to get up on stage like musicians every single day in order to have a stellar performance. And the same is obviously true in education. And Nolan and Michael actually spoke about this as well. It's about spacing it over time, repeating it over and over again so that I don't forget. But the same is obviously true with success. I have to repeat it over and over again in order to be successful, be able to deliver what I'm actually promising or even exceeding the expectations of my customers. What we try to do as well is not only to be, let's say, learning from music, learning from artists, and being as practical as possible in the classroom, but we're really trying to do is as well leverage technology. I believe technology is not the solution for everything. Technology is only a mean in order to resolve a certain issue or to improve a certain experience. As we see in this particular picture. Obviously, if you go to a stadium, and I could have taken as well a picture from the Real Madrid stadium, you want to go to the stadium, you want to live the experience. And that in education is absolutely important. You have to live the experience. The panel before us spoke as well about the social component of learning, being in a group, working jointly on certain projects. And I completely agree that this is absolutely essential. And you want to have this experience, you want to have this flair in order to be fully immersed in the overall experience. But as we see in this picture as well, technology can actually enhance certain aspects that are in real life not ideal, right? As we see, for instance, from that position where this picture is taken, it might be really difficult to actually see close up some of the players, see whether they're sweating, whether they're actually excited, whether they're planning the new plot in order to win the game. But obviously with the screen, with camera technology, I can do that, right? I'm going to have the opportunity, and as a consequence for the spectator in the stadium, I'm clearly enhancing this overall experience by combining the real life and, let's say, the digital experience. The same is absolutely true when we think of education. Digital can clearly enhance the overall experience of our students. So the previous panel already spoke a little bit about personalized learning, or adaptive learning as they called it. I couldn't agree more, and I just was sending out a tweet about that as well. I couldn't agree more with that because I really believe this is clearly the future, or we're already in this future happening right now. This is clearly a trend that is absolutely important. I'm glad to say as well that we started experimenting around that many, many moons ago, and we actually developed as well, similar to BrainRush, games, simulations, and we have seen that students get excited about that because they completely forget that they're actually learning. And at the end, you actually realize that they learn much more, that actually they retain the knowledge much better than learning from a textbook or learning from a faculty standing up on the stage and actually preaching them some knowledge. So the great thing is that gamification actually works. And if you continue playing this further ahead, we actually see that obviously all individuals are very distinct. They're very distinct with respect to how they actually want to learn, how they want to engage with this particular material, with a particular subject matter. And if we use technology, we can obviously go one step further and try to make it as adaptive as possible. And this is happening here and now. We have been working on a couple of things, developing games in order to really try to personalize education and try to implement the philosophy that one size doesn't fit all. Obviously, BrainRush is doing very similar things as well in that regard, right? But I think as well, we actually are at the verge of the next step. And the next step is, as you can see, a little bit smaller in this picture, is about measuring performance at a cognitive level. So actually not only seeing whether students advance and whether they actually learn, but really looking inside their brain to some extent. And we actually see already some companies who are actually already working on this. They're trying to capture, first of all, the brain waves of human beings, and they try to learn from that in order to see what they're currently thinking and how to improve further the acquisition of knowledge or the acquisition of expertise. So I clearly believe this is going to be the future, and I think if developments continue as they have been over the last 10 to 15 years, we're probably going to see these developments happening over the next 3 to 5 years. So that's going to be an exciting, exciting journey. So as I said, I wanted to focus on what we at least teach, what we change in what we teach, how we teach, but coming to the last category, which is about where we actually teach or where our students learn. When we look at most lecture theaters, at least at higher education institutions, they look a little bit like that. And probably you can spot that there's something wrong, because this lady here is the only one who doesn't have a laptop, right? Everybody else is actually sitting there connected with their laptop, working on the laptop. What we actually see as well is that these guys, all the way in the back, we can't really say that they have a hands-on, immediate relationship with their faculty standing all the way up front here. So what we really believe as well is that technology can really redefine what distance actually means. Because when we look at this distance here, as we said, it's not going to be a close distance. This actually feels like really far away. But obviously what we can do is bring students much closer. And again, technology can help us. Because here, I first of all engage students in a significantly smaller group. So as a consequence, interaction due to that is already allowed, is already possible, because very few students only have to interact with one faculty member. But at the same time, you're actually not sitting in a back row, but you're actually sitting in the very first row, you're sitting in the front row, having direct access to your faculty member, to your professor. So this is obviously already the reality. Interestingly enough, we have as well been doing this for many, many years in order to bring students from all over the globe into our classroom, because we realized since the beginning that it is going to be very difficult for many professionals especially to leave their job, come for instance from Singapore here to Madrid in order to study with us. So we actually already thought 10 years ago about new technologies, new ways how to actually bring them into the classroom. And believe me, 10, 15 years ago, this was rocket science. I mean, this was absolutely mind-blowing. This was amazing. Obviously, it is becoming more and more standard nowadays, and we're actually at the verge of launching some new initiatives in order to continue changing as well where our students learn. So one of the initiatives is something that we're going to be launching as well in 2 weeks' time. We actually called it the Wow Room, which actually is going to further enhance the overall immersiveness of the learning experience for the students. So please be tuned for the 20th of October. We're going to make sure to actually reach out to you and tell you much more about this initiative and about this technology. But I really believe as well that the future is even going one step further. The future is actually around this. The future is actually around virtual reality. As you see, even if you just walk outside the hall, you actually see multiple companies or multiple stands already talking about virtual reality. Some of them actually have the goggles where you can actually try it out and see being immersed in a completely different environment. The great thing is, this is the most amazing technology, the most amazing invention in order to further enhance education. And I would say even in two different ways. First of all, when it comes down to behavioral learning, actually having the opportunity to improve myself as a person, becoming a better person. Why? Because what we used to do 10, 15 years ago in the classroom was actually use role plays enacted by different students in the classroom in order to push students in a certain situation so that they actually felt with their own feelings about how it is being treated or mistreated by your boss, or how it is to actually give a bad news to your employees, right? But it always felt a little bit artificial because you're still watched by multiple people, you're standing in front of the classroom, you're obviously interacting as well with another classmate of yours, right? Which doesn't make it too real. But the cool thing about virtual reality is that what I can do is I can, in a split of a second, can actually place students in a completely different world. I can control everything in that environment. I can ensure that obviously in this environment, this student can live and experience the same situations over and over in order to further enhance learning. But at the same time, what we see as well is that virtual reality is a fantastic way, not only in order to develop behavioral skills, but at the same time, it is a fantastic opportunity to bring people closer to each other and actually make them feel, even they might be sitting at the other side of the globe, make them feel as they were sitting next to each other. So what we're really working on is really completely virtualizing our educational system, completely virtualizing the classroom, trying to basically put the classroom up in the cloud where we can then bring students together from all around the world, but making them feel as if they were all sitting here in Madrid, all sitting in one room, and having the opportunity, having the ability to clearly interact with all the different classmates. So as I said, I wanted to give you a brief overview in these 20 minutes about what we try to do. Even education is maybe not the typical example, the typical industry that is known for change, that is known for innovation. We try to do things in the sense of what we teach, how we teach, and obviously as well where we teach. And I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
Excellent segue, Martin, because I think IE Business School is a great case study that our institutions are not actually scared of innovation. They're often seeking innovation. They often need partners, and they need to be empowered to make bold decisions and have kind of courageous leadership. And so